This week on the Sports Initiative podcast, I sit down with international NBA scout Jason Filippi. He discusses his work with the likes of Miami Heat and San Antonio Spurs, the process of being a scout and what they look for when on assignment, and the importance of environmental fit when recommending a player. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please make sure you share it with friends and family. I hope you enjoy. Perfect. So, Jason, really appreciate you spending a bit of your afternoon with me. How are things your end? Are you all safe and well?
I'm safe and well. Still, going to see games, as much as I can, despite, all the travel restrictions and, just the hassle of, going around seeing games and all, and, budget restrictions for that matter. But anyways, I'm trying to stay in the loop because, like I said, this is the business I've chosen, and, I really like what I'm doing. So I, like to continue doing this, whatever capacity I can.
Perfect. So yeah, this is a really exciting podcast for me. So because I'm a San Antonio Spurs fan, so we've gone through our good years. We're on a bit of a decline at the moment, but
you can't have 27 straight years in the playoffs. I mean, you can't.
It was due. So, but I'm really excited to kind of dig a little bit deeper in terms of what the recruitment department and stuff of basketball looks like and the culture of it and stuff. So for individuals that maybe don't know you and haven't come across your work, do you just want to give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour of what you do and then where you've done it previously and where you do it now?
Well, I mean, long story short, I've been working in professional basketball for the last 26 years. I originally started off when I was still in college. I just worked for a local television station. I was one of the color commentators and co-hosts of a basketball themed show here in Bologna, Italy, where I live. And it was just local television, but that was kind of my gateway to the professional basketball world because even though it was a local TV, like I said, I got to meet a lot of important basketball people. And, I met agents, general managers, players, and all players that I would often interview. And anyways, like I said, it was just, kind of a progression from that point. I worked briefly as a sports agent in Italy, but to be totally honest, that was not a great experience. I just, I quickly discovered that even though I thought it would be super cool, that after about 2 years, that might not have been my path. Like I said, it was interesting, but I don't think I had what it takes. I mean that very honestly, and I'm totally okay with that. The thing is though that while doing that, that is where I kind of hooked up with people in the basketball world, specifically not only but specifically the NBA. Because just to give you a time frame, we're talking about 1998. So my goodness, a long time ago, a lifetime ago. Anyways, I was still young and handsome. And anyways, I was meeting all these NBA people while I was working as an agent, and I mean important NBA people. Remember, 1998, that was when the Euro craze began. That was when, the following year, 1999, was the year that, guys like Tony Parker, Andre Kirilenko, Gasol, that caliber player were drafted. And, in that moment, only a handful of NBA teams had a scout. Within, 2 years after that, though, every team had a scout. So anyways, for one of the few times in my life, I was at the right place at the right time. My brother Adam, who's currently working in basketball too, he's actually a pro scout with the Sacramento Kings right now. But he, was doing some consulting both for a local team as well as for an NBA team, the New Jersey Nets. And anyways, long story short, he kind of had the idea, say, hey, let's try to offer a consulting service to NBA teams because, every time I went to these events, and often I was with my brother, teams, general managers of teams would be asking us about players. And, got to the point that some almost felt guilty. We're saying, hey, Jason, sorry to bother you again. But I was thinking, I spoke with my boss, we can actually pay you to do some consulting for us. And anyways, one thing led to another. My brother and I, we started this international scouting service, which was kind of the first of its kind, geared specifically for NBA teams. Like I said, it was at the beginning of the Euro craze. And, we signed 4 teams literally within a day. And, we did it for a couple of years. My brother Adam actually then went on to work for the Lakers, who were a client. I continued to do the service myself on my own for a couple more years. And I peaked at 10 teams. So at one point, 1/3 of the NBA, I was consulting for 1/3, 1 out of 3 NBA teams I was consulting with. And anyways, after a couple more years, the Portland Trailblazers, so this is 2004, the Portland Trailblazers, who were one of my clients also, they asked me to work exclusively for them. And like I said, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse, let's put it that way. So the time had come for me to, migrate from being a mere scouting consultant to, becoming a full-time, lead scout, international scout for an NBA team. Anyways, and like I said, I worked with Portland for over 10 years. After managerial change, I was let go, but I hooked up with the Miami Heat as a consultant. Miami was one of my former clients too, so it's not a surprise that I hooked up with Miami. And after that, the Detroit Pistons. So this is 2015, 2016, I don't even remember. The Detroit Pistons, which were looking for, a full-time NBA scout because their previous scout had left the team to become a general manager in Europe. There was an opening there, and so they hired me. I consulted for the Detroit Pistons for 3 more years. Unfortunately, when Stan Van Gundy and his staff were let go, I was one of the many casualties there. And anyways, so for the past 3 years, I've just been trying to stay in the loop, and in the hope of hooking up with another NBA team. But obviously, I've spoken, done a little consulting, not much, but for European teams for that matter. Unfortunately, though, the COVID situation obviously hasn't helped because most teams, not just the NBA teams, obviously have, number one, cut their budgets, so they're certainly not going to hire new personnel, regardless whether it's scouting, coaching, or management. And it's just been harder to see games due to the travel restrictions, and it's also been harder to meet people because sometimes I go to a game, but we're all masks. We're all relegated to a certain area. We can't get up and walk around and, meet and greet people. We're supposed to stay in our seat with our masks on, no eating, no drinking, no, like I said, meeting. So that's become kind of a problem. But anyways, like I said, I'm doing some, trying to do some consulting here and there. I am a scout analyst, writer, contributor for various websites. I'm currently the lead international scout for the Pro Insight, PerspectiveInsights.com, as well as a regular contributor for BasketballNews.com, among others. And I do some freelance work here and there. And obviously, whenever I go to games, I always tweet something about what I'm seeing. So anyways, I know you said to do a brief presentation. That was, certainly not brief, but I hope gives you a better idea of my extensive background. I've basically worked, in pro basketball in different capacities for most of my adult life. I was still in college when I started to work, for the TV station. So, and like I said, it's been most of my adult life that I've been involved in basketball. And this, despite having a business degree, never used my business degree, but I'm happy that things have gone this way.
No, perfect. I think it gives a really nice oversight as to, what you've done previously and maybe some experiences for us to dig a little bit deeper into. So I guess the first question for me, which is if you're going to a game to watch a specific individual, so, this individual has been highlighted by one of your contacts and you're going in to do a report on this specific individual. What does that process actually look like for an NBA scout? So what due diligence are you doing prior? What are you looking for whilst you're there? And then what does the actual evaluation at the back end of that look like?
First of all, if you're scouting players, it's the process and the principles are not very different, whether you're scouting for an NBA team or a college team or a European team or a youth level team. I mean, the principles and the process are pretty much the same, actually. You know, they don't really change. Obviously, you're going to be looking at a different type of player. You know, what I found is that it was much easier to scout for an NBA team because there are fewer players to scout. Not that I scouted tons of players when I was working for the NBA teams, but at any given game, there were only a couple of guys. When I'm scouting a youth level team, you know, the under 16, under 18s for a college, you know, to the Pro Insight, you know, for example, website that I work for, their clientele is mostly college teams. And, you know, most of these young players, I mean, every kid from the Real Madrid under 18 is a Division I college player. Now, only a handful of them are legitimate NBA prospects. But every single one, their 10th man, you know, the last guy on the bench, he's good enough to play Division I. They're that good. So obviously, you know, when I was working for an NBA team, I'd write up 3 or 4 guys from Real Madrid. Now I write up literally the whole team. So that obviously is problematic because sometimes, you know, I have to make concessions. Say, okay, today I'm just going to focus on these guys. I can't, you know, follow 10 guys. You know, ideally, I'll scout 3 or 4 guys. You know, sometimes I'll scout 7 or 8, but, you know, there's a break-off point where I feel that, you know, diverting too much energy to too many players affects, you know, my judgment. So I just have to, you know, like I said, you know, it's just, okay, today I have to focus on these guys. Next time I'll see this team again. Anyways, but, you know, so your original question, though, what are you looking for? You know, obviously the players I see, in most cases, I know who I'm going to see. I mean, that's my job. You know, I'm supposed to know who I have to see. You know, my employer shouldn't have to tell me who to go to see. I'm the one that says, we need to see. I need to see it on your behalf. You know, you guys have to, you know, put it in the budget that I have to travel to this, you know, place where I need to go to see those players. Obviously, though, you know, sure, I do have, you know, contacts, whether they're coaches, agents, friends who will give me tips, you know, once in a while. In most cases, you know, I like to say that I always know the player. It's rarely ever happened that I didn't know the player. And of course, sometimes, you know, it's often that people will say, oh, Jason, I guess especially agents, oh, Jason, I have this kid. He's unbelievable. He's, you know, an NBA player. But, well, you know, agents, they're not very objective. So, you know, I'll try my best out of respect, you know, to say, okay, yeah, we can fit it in. You know, if you, you know, in fact, if we go to the game together and you're going to drive me to see him before the game or whatever, absolutely, you know, let's do it. Like I said, I don't want to, you know, I have to, you know, I don't want to, you know, leave any stone unturned because the truth is, though, that, you know, more often than not, it's a waste of time. But once again, you know, it's my job because, you know, I have to cover all my bases. I can't take any chances. More often, though, you know, people, whether it's an agent or not, somebody will send me a link to a website, to some game streaming or whatever, or highlights. And I will, you know, occasionally, you know, sometimes, you know, an interesting story that I like to tell regards Giannis Antetokounmpo, the Greek freak. Now, Giannis is the outlier of outliers. He was the exception to the rule. That was the rare, truly, you know, great player that people like myself did not know before. Like I said, anybody who's an NBA prospect, I usually know before, and I don't need you to tell me to go see him, you know. But he was the exception to the rule because, you know, like I said, he's a Hollywood movie that is currently being made, literally. You know, Giannis, you know, he was a refugee from Africa. He was an illegal immigrant. You know, he couldn't play, you know, he couldn't play, you know, in a professional league or even a semi-pro league because he didn't have the documentation. He was a legal immigrant. So, you know, what happened is that this happened many times. An agent, he would send me like, oh, Jason, hey, how's it going? And most other international NBA scouts who were working on that period when Giannis Antetokounmpo was, you know, drafted, they will tell you a similar story. His agent contacted him and said, hey, how's it going? Listen, I have this kid, unbelievable, freak of nature, blah, blah, blah. Here's some video on him. I was like, okay, Yargos, sure. You know, you know, how many agents that same day or the day before I called them with the same thing. And sooner or later, I'll maybe watch the link they send me even for just a couple minutes. And, you know, usually after 2 minutes, I can see, okay, this guy's not an NBA caliber player. But with Giannis, I have to say, I look, okay, wow, man, is he that tall? Are his arms that long? So I watched 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And then, of course, I was saying, okay, but he's playing literally against amateur competition. You know, he was playing, like I said, he was playing against, it was, like I said, it was an amateur level. It was not a pro league. It was like third division. He was playing against guys who had day jobs. Like I said, they were not professionals. So obviously, you know, that the context there, the competition level, obviously, you know, made what I was seeing not as impressive as it was at first glance. But then though, like I said, he did things though that I like, okay, hey, I can't do that. A lot of guys can't do that in an empty gym. I mean, you know, his athleticism and length though were unbelievable. And I have to say his feel for the game was better than I thought, considering the background of, you know, well, never having played organized basketball until then. Anyways, long story short though, I made the trip, you know, so this was like January of the year he was drafted. No one knew him. February, a couple teams went to see him. I went beginning of March. And like I said, there were many other scouts there too, pretty much most who would follow the same, you know, itinerary I did, you know, through like, okay, sure, I'll take a look at him, whatever. And like, oh, wow, okay. I need to see more here. Okay. And anyways, I went and like I said, just, you know, seeing him up close, you know, just, you know, those long arms and everything. I said, oh my God, this kid is a freak of nature. That is, you know, the correct term because he was. And, you know, like I said, now when I have drafted him at number 15, 16, 18, wherever the Milwaukee Bucks drafted him, I'm not that sure. I am surprised. I knew Giannis had the potential to be an NBA player and a good one too, but that he would be the MVP of the league, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And, you know, like I said, Giannis was not, you know, what he is in day one. It's not like Luka Doncic, who was the best player on his team as a rookie. Giannis, you know, he came off the bench as a rookie. Obviously, they love his potential. I mean, Giannis, it took him 3 or 4 years, you know, to become an all-star caliber player, and another, you know, couple years. I think Giannis has been in the league now 7, 8 years. You know, but it was a process. You know, he didn't average 30 points from day one, but like I said, it's incredible the progression he's made. So I never thought he would have become that good. So anyways, you know, like I said, you know, I usually know who I have to see. Obviously, my focus is, you know, main focus working for an NBA team is the young players that are still draftable. But, you know, I did scout also free agents, you know, veteran European players as well as American guys playing overseas. And I probably did that more and more, you know, over the course of my career, even though always my number one focus, my bread and butter was and always will probably be younger players that are under age 22, players that are still eligible to declare for the NBA draft. And right now I'm going even younger because, you know, I'm looking at players that are about like age 16, if not even younger, players that are eligible to go to college in the United States also. So like I said, the workload is just increasing. I'm just looking at more and more players and, you know, getting younger and younger, you know, every year now. And anyways, you know, what do I look at? Long story. I mean, the first, there are many things. The first thing is the most obvious thing, his physical characteristics. I mean, that's the first thing I see, and especially for the NBA, but, you know, not only, but for the NBA even more so. If you don't have the right body type, no matter how good you are, you're not an NBA player. You know, you can have exceptions of so-and-so who is short and small, but like I said, they're exceptions. But, you know, for most players, I mean, the obvious comparison, you know, just, you know, look, you know, see, you know, just look at his body type, you know, his height for his position, his wingspan is very important. You know, I didn't understand why when I first started scouting, but I do understand why for so many teams, wingspan is very, very important. You know, having long arms.
Why is that?
For multiple reasons, mostly for defense, because, the longer your arms, the more effective you'll be defensively, regardless of your position. If you have long arms and you're a guard, you're going to be able to intercept and deflect more passes out on the perimeter. If you're a big man, it'll help you block shots. It'll help you get closer to rebounds. And, today there seems, the traditional center position has changed so much and been devalued so much. There's so many small ball teams playing. But, most of these small ball teams that have, like I said, a relatively small center compared to the traditional centers, not a 7-footer guy who's 6'8", maybe playing center. They all have one thing in common. They all have very long arms. They may be only 6'8", playing against 7-footers, but they all have freakish, like 7'3", 7'4" wingspan. So 5-6 inches, longer. Because the average person, his wingspan is usually the exact same as his height. So if you're 6 feet tall, your wingspan, your arms like this will be 6 feet 2. To have +2, +3, +4 is, not common. Most people, the average person, it's +1, if not, just equal to your height wingspan. Anyway, so that's thing. And then obviously, just his body type. Scouting young kids, it's very important. I mean, your average 16, 17-year-old is going to be really skinny. So sometimes you see these kids that I say, oh my God, this kid is so skinny. He looks anorexic, or he looks like, a child, from an impoverished African country who's dying of starvation. Oh my God, poor thing. But you have to remember, hey, I was skinny too when I was, 15. Like I said, some guys, are late bloomers. They have a late growth spurt, or like I said, they have a growth spurt and they grow. But like I said, they just, grow in height, but, they don't have any much muscle, so the thing is I look at, is obviously, even if a kid's very skinny though, it's a different, if he has a very narrow frame, that's a red flag. That's an alert, because that means if you're skinny and you have a narrow frame, you're never going to be very strong. You can put on all the muscle you want, but if you have a small frame. But if a guy is skinny, yes, really thin, but he has very broad shoulders, that's something I have to notice. Say, okay, I won't worry about his strength now because he has broad shoulders. As soon as he gets to a weight room or just continues his natural growth spurt, he's going to add muscle and mass regardless. It just goes, with his growing. So that's
what Giannis did, wasn't it? He came into the league very slight, but if you look at the difference of him now, it's night and day.
Now he's just Mr. Muscle. I mean, just chiseled muscles. All over. Like I said, he can be a bodybuilder. A bodybuilding competition now. Anyway, so these are other things. Like I said, you have to project. I'll be repeating this a lot during our conversation. Scouting, among other things, among the many things as well, projecting. Because, evaluating what you see and what is now, but also projecting if and how that can change in the future. And obviously getting back to body types. So, like I said, a 16-year-old is really skinny, but he has broad shoulders. That's good. That means it's, most likely that he's going to fill out. At the same time, though, you find guys that were early developers. You find a 16-year-old kid who looks like a man. He's got muscles. He's, big, strong, and he's got a beard. He's been shaving since he was 13 years old. I myself, I'm 6 feet. I'm 6'2". I'm 6'2", 1.89 meters. I've been this tall since I was 13. I haven't grown an inch height-wise since I was 13. I put on weight, put on muscle, and not just muscle, some fat too. But I was shaving when I was in middle school. Most of my other kids were not. They were still little kids. I was at age 13, I was a man among children. Unfortunately, though, I didn't grow. I was playing center and I was dominating. But a couple years later, the kids that I was dominating against now, they're suddenly 6'6", 6'7", 6'8". But 3 years ago, they were 5'10". You know what I mean? So projecting, just the body type, like I said, it's very common that I'll see a guy at 60 who just dominates because he's physically superior to others. And 2 years later, not 10 years later, 2 years later, suddenly he's just average, playing against the same players, the same team, same competition, the same national team competition. It's funny, the European under 16 competition, it's always interesting to compare what happened with the same group. Because what I find is that, there'll be new players, but there's often a nucleus, a core group of players from any age group in any country and any national team that is going to be the same, forever. It's interesting to see which players, improve between age 16, 18, and which players are the same. It often happens that the guy who was the best player at the European U16 2 years later, he's not the best player anymore. His backup who grew 5 inches or put on 20 pounds, or like I just matured and improved and everything, is now better than he was.
That's Anthony Davis is like that, isn't he? He started off as he was a point guard, and then all of a sudden grew so much, and he's got the handling and ball skills equatable to a lot of point guards, but actually he's in a 7 foot frame, 6'11" frame.
Yeah, in most cases, whenever you see a 7-footer who can face up and has wing skills, if not guard skills, it was typically a guy who had a late growth spurt. So he was playing, maybe not point guard, but he was a wing player. So he had those face up ball handling skills, and then suddenly he kept growing and went from being a shooting guard to being a power forward, if not a center. So that's much more, it's more common than people think, and it's a great advantage. I mean, like I said, I got gypped. I had my early growth spurt, and that was the end of it. I never improved. So anyways, as I said, and then obviously athleticism factor, scouting for the NBA, especially, like I said, I shouldn't be, too biased because, I have to look at the whole package, but obviously if a guy, regardless of his height, is not athletic, that's going to be a handicap. That's going to be a major obstacle. I won't write him off, but that's one of the most important things. I said, he has very average athleticism for his position at the NBA level, or for the college level, or for the pro level. When you're playing at the youth level, it may not be a factor because if you're taller or if you're simply better, you'll still be able to, to stand out and dominate. But, once you move up, if you're not a great athlete, especially if you're a guard or a wing player, that's going to be a major obstacle. It's just like.
How do you assess that? Because obviously you look at someone like Luka Doncic. I haven't seen a lot of footage of him in Europe, but I'd imagine in Europe he would have been physically pretty good. Whereas, he could go across to the NBA and actually there'll be other athletes similar to Giannis who are unbelievable. So how do you go around judging, and what criteria do you use to say, okay, he's very good athletically here, but at the NBA level, he'll be average, or he's average here, and that's going to be a massive red flag when he does go to the NBA? What do you see? What do your eyes tell you?
I mean, it's not often not a specific thing. It's often just, like I said, I've been doing this for many years. Certain things you just notice, and it's, obviously even in warm-ups, maybe this one guy's doing, windmill slam dunks, highlight reel slam dunk contest dunks. I mean, okay, this guy's a leaper. That I'll immediately put in my notes. But once again, it's not one thing I learned when I first started scouting. I thought meeting an athlete was meant jumping. That's not necessarily true. Sure, jumping is important, but be a great athlete. There are a lot of guys who I often label as good athletes vertically, but average athletes laterally. That is much more important. So, like I said, I have to look at, how they play. More often than not, their athletic shortcomings will be more obvious on defense, because especially, for wing players, if they're not quick laterally, quickness is often more important than sheer athleticism. Having quick reflexes, quick feet is just as important, if not more important, than being, just a flat out freak athlete who can fly, and dunk over people. You say the Luka Doncic. Now, Luka Doncic, though, obviously, he is not a great athlete. He's not a great athlete, but that has not been much of a limit because he's Luka Doncic. Luka Doncic is an outlier. He's an exception. Obviously, when he was 16 and dominating, not just against, his peers, but already, holding his own at the pro level, it was obviously because though he's Luka Doncic, he was an exceptionally mature, young man, exceptionally, talented player. And the one thing he did have, though, he had incredible size for his position, and that compensated. He didn't have to dunk over people. He was a 6'8" ball handler. He just had to bully his way to the rim. He didn't have to dunk over people, pull by them. They couldn't stop him from getting to the rim, physically. He didn't have to, beat them off the dribble. He just overpowered them. And that has worked even in the NBA too. That was not a given, to be honest with you. I was afraid that he would have trouble creating for himself as well as finishing at the rim, but that has not has not been a problem. Just like Luka is Luka. He just has certain instincts. But I know a lot of guys that had Luka Doncic game, 6'7", 6'8" ball handlers who, would post up, every other guard. But as good as they were, they didn't have Luka's ability to, adapt to, different types of defenders. And, maybe they would still be good for the EuroLeague, but they're not, good enough for the NBA, perhaps.
And going back to what you said around the lateral quickness, just using that as an example, is there any particular moments in a game where you can go, right, this is really going to highlight it? So if I look at it from a football perspective, because obviously I've got more experience in that, I'd be able to see someone's footwork in a 1v1 scenario out wide on the pitch because you've got a winger running at the player and they have to shift their feet. So for you, is there any particular moment in a game where you can look at them and go, right, their lateral speed will be tested here. So if I focus in really on this moment, this is going to give me a good identifier to what their lateral quickness looks like?
Once again, sometimes it's a specific thing. Sometimes I just, see that. Obviously, over the course of the game, if a guy gets beat off the dribble, that's a bad sign. I don't even go so much into the analysis of how quick he is laterally. It's obvious. People are getting by him. So either he's not a great athlete laterally, or he's not a good defender. And obviously, and also look at the opponents. Who's playing against. If you're playing against a guy, if you're a big guard and you're facing a smaller player who's super quick, though, that's obvious, and you manage to stay in front of them. Obviously, that means that your lateral quickness is good enough. So it also depends on who you're playing against. Like I said, if a guy's, I'll often write this, a guy who has average athleticism, all right, he did a great job defensively today. He played hard, he was focused, he stayed in front of his man, but he did not guard a single guy today who was a good athlete. Then maybe the next game he's going to be facing, a veteran American player who's a really good one-on-one player and a really good athlete, and suddenly he starts to struggle. That's why you see guys more than once. Sometimes a guy will have a bad game, but he's a good player. And sometimes a guy will have a great game, but he's not as good as he looked because he was playing against a bad team, or the guy he was guarding was not very good, or for whatever reason. So that's another reason to see guys more often, as often as you can. And anyways, so like I said, I spent a lot of time, just analyzing the physical characteristics, both, just the visual ones, does the guy pass the eye test? And then the physical implications. Like I said, is he athletic? How is he athletic? Laterally, vertically, both. And then after that, I get more into, the game specific. So what does he do on the court? Usually when I say player, the first part of the game, I just focus on him offensively because I need to see what he can do. I always joke that, I'm better to evaluate players on offense than on defense, but that's, like I said, that's why you see players more than once, because, I admit it when I first see a player, I look at his offense, his defense, like, how was he defensive? Like, I didn't really pay much attention that day, but I'll pay more attention tomorrow when I see him again, or next week when I see him again, or I'll watch some video on him, in one-on-one situations and stuff like that. So I need to see what he can do for me. If he has what his strengths are, on the offensive end, and if that strength is something that translates. You'll find a guy in Europe perhaps who's a great all-around scorer. He can hit the three-pointer, he can drive, he can go one-on-one, he can get to the rim. But often it's like, I don't know if he can get to the rim and finish that way at the NBA level. At the NBA level, he may just be a shooter, which means he's going to play in a different way. He's just going to stand out on the perimeter, become a catch and shoot guy, and wait for the ball to be kicked out to him, so he can shoot it, which is fine. I mean, there's a premium on shooters today, regardless of position. Being able to shoot from 3-point range is a must, for any position now, pretty much. More, and so obviously that's something that is very important to look at. What does he do here, and what will this translate to a higher level competition? Yes, no, and accordingly that will influence my final evaluation. It's also, like I said, very important. Today's characteristics. Back in the day, if you were played position 4 or 5, being able to shoot from outside was not important. In fact, you didn't want your big man. You wanted your big man to stay in the low post and mix up and power the ball to the rim. Today, it's the opposite. Like I said, 20 years ago, if a guy could shoot if a 7-footer could shoot a 3-pointer, that was irrelevant. It was like, yeah, he has a nice shooting touch. Who cares? We don't want him to shoot 3-pointers. He's 7 feet tall. Today, it's like, this guy, he's got great low post moves. He's got a great high jump hook and this, reverse move, reverse pivot. But it's like, if he can't shoot though from, I'm not saying 3-point range, but if he can't shoot from, mid range, that's a problem today. So the game has changed even in that aspect. Things that I was looking at, giving more importance one day, today are less important. Things that I gave less importance to. The specific example, a big man's shooting range today is very, very important. There's, today I have to label if you're a big man, traditional center or modern big man, stretch big man who can help stretch the floor. This is a huge distinction today. Fundamental. It's one of the first questions that I'm asked when I'm talking about a player. Can he shoot it from the perimeter? If he's a big man, can he stretch it? If he's a guard, can he score off the dribble with a pull-up, or is he simply a guy that needs to have his feet set and needs to have the ball passed to him, running off a screen? These are all very important things to look at, in a player. And obviously, some are generic. Can he shoot it? Yes or no, which is important regardless of the position. And others, though, position specific. Big man, is he a post-up big man or a face-up big man, or just a rim runner, somebody who's going to get most of his points, just off pick and rolls and cuts to the basket? Is he a guy that can, for guards, can he create his own shots? Can he create for others? Or is he a guy who's going to be dependent, on, screens and, people, finding him at the right time in the right position? So, like I said, both various types of aspects of, what I can do offensively. And, and also, passing skills. These are the things, guys, his decision-making. This is obviously more important with guards than big men, but, something like I said, does he force plays? Does he make the right play? When he shoots the ball, was there maybe an opportunity where he had one of his teammates was in a better position, but, he was being selfish? These are all things, his shot selection that I look at. Is, like I said, is he a good passer? Is he a selfish player? Is he a team player? And, and the same thing goes for defense. Obviously, first I have to look, from an individual standpoint on defense. Number one, does he stay in front of his man? And also in a team frame. So yeah, he stays in front of his man, but he's oblivious to what's happening around him. He never helps, his teammates. He just stays on his own man to make sure his own man doesn't score. Things like that. As we talked about, lateral mobility, lateral quickness, how important that. Today another, fundamental thing for big men is, can he switch onto a smaller player? If a big man can't switch today, that he probably can't be an NBA player. He may be good enough to be a Euro Pro player. He may be a good college player. But if you're a big man and you can't defend a smaller player, after a switch, that's a huge obstacle. That's usually a deal breaker, at least for a guy, who's maybe not for a 16-year-old kid, but certainly a guy who's 19, 20. If you can't switch, if you're a 7-footer, you can't switch onto a smaller player at age 20, you're never going to be able to. That's not something you learn. Either you have the physical characteristics to do that, or you don't.
Just on that, so obviously, and this leads into the next question, when you're projecting for players, obviously there may be some skills they don't currently possess, but you think actually they have the capabilities to be taught it. So how do you go around projecting that? Like I look at someone like Kawhi Leonard, for example. He came in not having a particularly good 3-point range from college, but then he did a lot of work at San Antonio, where now he's quite good at it. There'll be other players, like you mentioned, the switch inside as centers, someone like Serge Ibaka potentially, that probably has the physical characteristics to be able to switch, but maybe hasn't had a lot of success with it, or hasn't had a lot of opportunity to be trained it. So how do you go around projecting individuals that you think they don't currently do this, but from what I've seen, I believe X, Y, and Z would lend itself to being taught that at the next level and being able to do it well?
Yeah. Well, as you said, you made a good example of Kawhi Leonard, as a matter of fact. So yeah, that's, like I said, that's one of the most important, jobs of a scout, to be able to project, many things, whether it's a specific skill or how his game will translate to the to higher level competition, or how he will fit into a certain team specific system. Obviously certain characteristics. Yeah, if you're flat footed and slow, you can't be taught to become a freak athlete. Either you have, now you can improve your body, you can become stronger, and certainly working on your footwork and adding more strength to your body, so your legs, you can become a better runner, you can become quicker, but there's only so much you can do. Another thing though, sometimes you're going to find a guy who has physical characteristics. Oh, this guy's an athlete, he can jump, he can move, but he doesn't play hard. You know what I mean? So that's another thing, evaluating, players, just his will, his tenacity, his toughness, and, his motor, and all. But anyways, like I said, projecting, like I said, it's not an exact science. I go a lot by experience too, and sometimes I'm wrong, but, sometimes it's just a gut feeling. Like I said, you just have to look to see, things like shooting, for example, is one of the most common things that you can improve and correct. You may never be able to, dunk from the free throw line, no matter how much you work on your legs and all, but, stuff like shooting and, like I said, just playing hard defense, boxing out, a big man who's an average rebounder can become a better rebounder simply just by, teaching him to, his mindset, teaching him to box out, just instinctively body up to an opponent and to go after the ball rather than to wait for the ball to bounce in his direction eventually. So those are things that, you can teach to some degree. But, like I said, then there are other factors, just like, the player's, will and his, will to work and to fight for the ball. Thing I look at, is the, guy, when there's we call them 50-50 balls, a ball that bounces in your direction, but there's another player there. On average, how often do you get the ball when you have to fight for it, with another player? How often do you get a rebound that didn't bounce in your direction and bounced closer to your opponent, but you still managed to get it because you anticipated and you jumped and you ran towards the ball with great energy. So, once again, these are things that are not an exact science, and even the position, of players is something, obviously it's very common that, a guy is going to, play inside because he's the tallest guy on his team growing up, but, he may have to become more of a wing player at the pro level if he wants to play at the pro level. So you have to see, okay, Kawhi Leonard played, position 4 at San Diego State, but, he had great lateral movement. He was an athlete. He had great defensive, versatility and capacity. The Spurs saw something, worst case scenario, this guy is going to become a great wing defender, a guy that can defend, help pressure the ball as well as, guard, bigger players as well. And we're going to work on his shot. And if that improves, we've got a starter here. If that doesn't improve, though, we've got a guy that's a rotation player. I'm guessing that was kind of their mindset there, because like I said, Kawhi Leonard is not the player he was when he first came into the league. His game has evolved and changed radically, and he's improved a lot, in part through hard work, in part because of his physical talents, but certainly it's been a process. It didn't happen overnight. And like I said, so yeah, projecting that, is very important. And also, it's like today, more and more NBA teams are putting a premium on player development. They're hiring more coaches who are specialized in working with players, after practice, in the off season, on improving specific aspects of their game, whether it's their footwork, their post-up work, their shooting touch, their ball handling, or just working on their body. And that's, like I said, a very important thing. When I was fortunate to work for teams that had a premium on player development, so I was always thinking, this guy, he's not a very good shooter, but he does everything else well. I'm sure that if he comes to us and he works with our shooting coach, he's going to become a good enough shooter to play the position or to be, to be on the floor. So that's, another very important, just kind of, put in the appropriate context, for your team's, specific needs and culture and the place where the team is. Like I said, if you're out playing for a team that's fighting for the championship, you need to sign guys that can play today. If you're a team that's rebuilding and you're 4 years from being able to, be a playoff team, you can say, this kid, he's a late bloomer. He's, I don't know, maybe he's not going to become as good as I hope, but he's got a huge, huge upside, a very high ceiling. Then this is, the type of guy that you take a chance on if circumstances, permit it.
That's really interesting. So now, obviously, you're linking it to the handing it over to the team itself. So if you talk about that evaluation piece, you've obviously gone and you've done all your contextual information, you've watched a player however many times, or what does your actual report look like? So in terms of a template, if you could just break it down for us, like what subheadings are there? Obviously, you've gone through a little bit in terms of what detail there is, but is it very structured or is it really open-ended and you just write what you see?
Yeah, it depends. I've changed my scouting, my scouting way, my scouting formats over the years. And when I was working for professional teams, they usually would have a template of some sort to follow. It didn't necessarily have to be, ad verbatim, but, to try to, just as a reference. But every team was different. And I can tell you, some teams I worked for were super detail-oriented, analytical, and they, in addition to my scouting report parts, there would be then a series of, questions to answer. There'd be a drop-down menu in the website database where I would, paste and copy my game report, but then I would have to complete a series of, questions. Some were like drop-down questions or evaluate on a 1 to 5 scale, perhaps, certain specific characteristics of the player. So every team was different. Some teams I worked for, they just wanted to be as synthetic as possible. They wanted bottom line. Jason, give me, his, based on what you saw, give me his strengths and his weaknesses. And overall, what do you think he can be? Is he an NBA player? Yes or no? If so, why and what could he do specifically for us? Other teams, there was just, a million questions. It would take me 45 minutes, per report, where with the other team it would take me 5 to 10 minutes. So every team is different. Usually, though, personally, how I like to structure things, once again, this is how I would do my essay part of the report. Then, like I said, if my team required me to answer then other specific questions in a different format, I would do so. But my way of work, now that I'm just doing my own thing and I don't have to, worry about putting it in a format for someone else, I pretty much simply do this. I divide it into either physical characteristics, the very first thing, physical characteristics, physical traits, then offense, defense, and then an overall summary of what I saw, as well as a projection of the player. So, okay, this guy, he's having a great season, but he played poorly today, but I still like him because, and then I'll say, I think this guy's an NBA player and he's a first rounder or a second rounder. And then something also specifically just to sum it up, his characteristics, for the NBA, projected role in the NBA, or at least projected role for our team, defender, passer, shooter, scorer, rebounder, I can have multiple characteristics. So ultimately, it was basically, like I said, physical characteristics, offense, defense, and then kind of an overall summary where I would, specify, what role he would have in the NBA, or at least on the team I was working for, or also, just even simply strengths and weaknesses, and then an overall, projection, based on that. So those are pretty much the two main templates, if you may, that I have used and continue to use, whether it's, visual or just kind of, the logic that I follow, physical characteristics, offense, defense, even if I don't label, and put bullets, pretty much there's a logical progression to my report. It makes sense. It's not just a random list of things. And I have a lot of scouts, older scouts, who they're very informal. They just write a bunch of broken sentences, good shooter, a good team defender, poor one-on-one defender, very synthetic, but often those are the best ones because they get to the point. Quantity is not is not the thing. It's quality that's important. But the most important thing, though, Michael, is not that. The most important aspect of my scouting reports and what I do and see is the intel part, the information. Yeah, of course, the scouting report is the main product, but the most important thing is the separate intel report, which, no matter how good a guy was and is going to project to be, if I get bad intel on him, if I get bad information about him being a bad guy, not being a hard worker, having, some personal issues, whether they're, not his fault or not, but, hey, sure, a guy that comes from a broken family, it's not like in Hollywood movies where, the guy from the rough background that made him tougher and made him work harder. Yeah, sometimes that happened with Giannis, having a rough, childhood and poverty probably helped him becoming what he is today, motivated him. But for a lot of, young men, unfortunately, that's becomes, an obstacle that they can't get over, no matter how talented they are. It's going to come to the surface. So before you commit 20, 30, 40, 50 million dollars to a guy, you want to know what type of guy this is off the court. If he's a guy who's going to be hanging with the wrong crowd, a guy whose parents were alcoholics, the chances that he becomes an alcoholic are higher than an average person. This is just an example. Things, I'm not going to say, oh, we can't sign him because his dad was an alcoholic. No, but you're going to be worried about that. Does he drink though? Only socially. Okay, but maybe, maybe 4 years, not 5 years. That's the type of, thing. So the intel is fundamental. And that is something, I have tons of people. Oh, hi, Jason. I heard. I read about you. Nice to meet you. I know you've been scouting. I want to become a scout too. What can I do? And I say, well, listen. I can give them all the advice I want, but I'll tell them this: knowing basketball is not what's going to get you hired. Yeah, you need to know basketball, but being able to get information other people can't get is what is going to get you the job long term. Your scouting reports may be the best, the most detailed, the most accurate, the best projections. But if you can't then get personal information on the player to corroborate that, it's all useless. Because, like I said, if a guy is, a bad guy, a guy who's a bad teammate, a guy who's not a hard worker, who cares if he's a good player? We're not going to sign him. I'm not going to, or at least we're not going to offer him 50 million. Yeah, maybe we'll offer him less than that for 2 years, but we're not going to give him 5 years, 50 million. We'll give him 2 years, 5 million, maybe. So these are really important things, and that's the hard thing. The networking is fundamental. Once again, a young man who starts scouting, he's going to find himself, having problems creating that network. Like I said, people think that, oh, I watch a lot of basketball. I love basketball. I know basketball. I can analyze players. Great. That's a good start. But if you can't then corroborate that and complement that with the information on the player off the court, it's useless. A team won't hire you if you can't provide that information. I always like to say, I am not the best scout in the world. I think I'm good enough because I made a living off it for many years. But my main asset, I have always believed, and most of my employers agreed with me, my main asset was my intel. He said, I'm not going to say I'm a better scout than the guy you have now, but I will say I will give you better personal information than the scout you have now. maybe presumption on my part, but that was my pride. And, when I took pride in, that was where I felt I had a competitive advantage because of my networking and the fact that I knew so many people in basketball for so many years that I would be able to get more information than the next person than the other scouts. Because, like I said, I know a lot of people, usually knew more people than most other scouts, people from many different countries, different cultures, and also that I had a relationship that people would give me exact information. Because sure, not all intel sources are as good as others. Some guys, they'll be, oh, Jay, sure, hey, can I ask you? Oh, sure, Jason, no problem. Ask me anything you want about this kid. But in the end, they're going to say, oh, no, he's a great kid, Jason. Don't worry about him. He's a hard worker. And I'm not saying they're going to lie to me, but sometimes they're not objective. Sometimes they're not objective because, they're like a parent. They've been coaching this kid since he was a kid. So, yeah, they really know this kid well. They've known him since, but they're not objective. They're almost like a parent, saying, oh, it's a great kid. He works so hard. And, maybe he's a good guy, but maybe he doesn't work that hard. He works. You know what I mean? Or in some cases, extreme cases, a team, yeah, the guy's good, but he's, he's a total a-hole. But they can't tell me that because they've been given orders. Listen, people think this guy is better than he is. And, if he's drafted in the first round by the NBA, we're going to get a €2 million buyout. You tell them that he's a great guy. The fact what happened at the club last week, no one should know that, So I need guys that can tell me, listen, Jason, he's not a bad kid, but he's gotten in trouble with the law because of this and that. I need to know that information,
Is that where having a network helps? Because maybe if you can't go directly to that team, you might know someone in a neighboring town or a neighboring team that will know, for example, that will go, actually, listen, we play against this kid, or we've got a guy that's come across and he's told us this. And
oh yeah, absolutely.
Having that network of going, can I corroborate this story in 2 or 3 different areas? They might not come from the team or the horse's mouth, so to speak, but actually I'm getting a picture from everyone else around it that this is one we need to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly how it is. Like I said, that's why having many sources. If the first guy I asked says something good about him, I don't stop there. It's like, oh, no problem. This guy's a great guy. No, I ask more people. And likewise, if somebody says something bad about him, it's not like, oh no, it's a red flag. We can't take it. Obviously I get more sources, but obviously I give more importance to somebody who says something bad about him. And there are different types of bad, though. Hey, maybe the guy's biased. Hey, maybe the kid was dating the coach's daughter, and the coach doesn't like him for the wrong. So he's he's not going to flat out lie to him and say, this kid, he's not serious. He's talented, but I just don't like him. But maybe for personal reasons. I mean, that example I made is actually a very realistic example, by the way. But things like that. Just players going out and a thing. That's also, a guy, likes to go out at night and party. That's you have to take into consideration. That doesn't mean though that all the guys that stay at home are good guys, because maybe a guy stays at home, but when he's lonely, he drinks and gets drunk. Just like the guy that goes out all the time doesn't mean that he's a wild party animal, because he goes out, but he doesn't go out the day before the game. You know what I mean? He's very professional. Yeah, after a big win, he's gonna go out and probably drink and have a party and have women and whatever. Just you have to take that into perspective. Like I said,
so this goes on to my next question. I think it's quite a point in time to come into it. Is how does each team have different either characteristics that they look for, cultural fit? So if we're talking like a player there, if you get drafted by Oklahoma, or you get drafted by the New York Knicks, they're 2 very, very different environments to be in. And for an individual who might have some challenges, if he's able to go out till 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, that might be way more achievable without getting caught in New York than it is in OKC. So from your experience, how different is what each organization, each institution that is looking for, and how much does that affect then the players you're recommending? I guess both on court and off court in this scenario.
Well, it definitely affects it a lot, more than you would think, actually. And it's both the on court aspect as well as the off court aspect. Obviously, on the court, each team has specific needs that are relative to the current level of talent of their team to the current state. Are they contenders? Are they rebuilding? Are they a veteran team? Are they a young team? So like I said, adding if you're a championship team, you want guys that contribute immediately. If you're a team that's rebuilding, you're fine with, drafting a kid and stashing him in Europe or bringing him over, having him in the D League, for a year. They're open to that. Oklahoma City is the right place to send a young guy who's not ready, for example. Milwaukee, Phoenix, and the Lakers, they want guys that can play today. They prefer, a guy who's ready, or maybe they won't draft a European kid, but they'll draft a European, 26-year-old veteran guy because they think this guy can come off the bench immediately, for example. And, and then obviously the way the team plays, in Miami, I consulted for Miami, so I know their organization very well. And, they, like I said, if a guy, wasn't a hard worker, a tough guy, a guy that put his defense, they wouldn't take him. It was a deal breaker. They wouldn't even think like, oh, we'll teach him. No, if we have to teach him that, we're in trouble. He has to come. If he has one thing, he has to be a tough. Other teams, they wouldn't care. They say, hey, this guy's talented. Who cares if he doesn't play defense? Or, hey, we got a good group here. We're going to teach him. We're going to give him some structure, which, I personally think is probably the best way to go about it. But every team, is different. And, obviously certain teams like to play, some teams like to play fast. If you have a coach, Mike D'Antoni, before all the teams were shooting 3-pointers and, playing small ball, when Mike D'Antoni's teams were the first teams to do that routinely. Obviously, I didn't work for Phoenix, but, the scout of Phoenix, I'm sure that he wouldn't be recommending a traditional old school big man low post player to the Phoenix Suns in that era. They wanted, guys that were fast, that could run, and that, could face up and shoot it. They don't want a point guard who was just a great slasher. If he was not a good 3-point shooter, he wasn't the guy for them. He needed to be also a good 3-point shooter, in addition to being a slasher. So, the style of the team's game is very important also. Ultimately, though, the number one thing that counts is the culture, though, in the end. I've worked for many different NBA teams, and, a lot of them, yeah, sure, a lot of them look for some of the same things, but at the same time, a lot of them also have very different parameters. And some teams, like I said, put more of a premium, on intel, on, just the players, personal characteristics. And sometimes, it was just the GM had a different philosophy. Sometimes it was the team's culture that had just permeated, the team, and that was the way it has been always there. Like I said, in San Antonio, if you don't fit your culture, they're not going to draft you or sign you. Same with Miami. Teams like the Knicks, though, for example, they only care if you're a good player, if you have star quality. Sure, if you're a drug dealer, they wouldn't want to take you, but they would grant you a lot of leeway, from on a personal level. Because, like I said, for them, it would be more important just if you can play. So that's what I've learned. Every team has a different culture. And like I said, it was interesting, just the types of questions that I would be asked when I was consulting for multiple teams, that some, they only wanted intel. They didn't ask me a single characteristic, can this guy shoot or not, either because they already read my report or they did their own reports, and what I wrote would just corroborate, what they had already seen themselves. What they wanted to know is, what makes this guy tick. So we'd spend hours on the phone talking about non-basketball things. I mean, not, on the court things, just, do you think that, this is a guy, he's a small city kid. Yeah, he's a good kid, according to all sources, but is he going to be, how's he going to react to the bright lights of Miami and LA and New York, stuff like that? Because, that's very important, especially when you have to make these huge commitments, multi-year commitments, the NBA, they honor their contracts. It's not like European teams where, the team's losing, we're not going to pay anybody, or, the guy isn't playing well, he missed a practice, you're not going to get paid this month. NBA teams, they'll leave the lawyers, that work to the lawyers, but teams will pay. So, that's very important. So, the cultural differences, are what I work for many NBA teams, and with all due respect to the other teams I've worked for, because they all I met great people. I was fortunate enough to associate with some great people from many, many teams. But I have to say, the two teams that I've consulted with over the years, and I've seen this, continue today, just from afar. The two teams that I think have the best culture are the Miami Heat and the San Antonio Spurs. That's no disrespect to the other teams, but I just think that those two teams, they have something that it's intangible, you just have to be there to experience, to understand it. But there's a reason that, San Antonio was good for so many years, that Miami always seems to be competitive. They have an off year every year or two, but they managed to rebuild very, very quickly. When LeBron left, a couple of years ago, the team struggled for a couple of years, but now Miami is back, to being a power, in the NBA, and that goes to the culture there that Pat Riley has created. Like I said, they know what they're doing. They want players that fit a certain mold, both on and off the court. And it's not a coincidence. Like I said, Miami. Others, people that work with Miami said, Jason, though, if he's not a tough guy, he can't work with Pat Riley. And it's true, though. I mean, to work with Pat Riley, you have to be a tough guy, both on and off the court. Tough, mentally tough to be able to take the hard work that they demand from you, in practice, working on your game, spending extra time, as well as what they expect you from the game, and also being able to, take criticism, pressure, both from, the coaching staff and just from the city, just, the pressure that comes from playing for teams that have a certain tradition. And, San Antonio is probably, whereas Miami has been always a very close-knit group. They've had the same group of managers and scouts forever. San Antonio has spread out a lot because, the famous San Antonio coaching and management tree is a thing. I mean, so many scouts, managers, coaches, in the NBA all started off with the San Antonio culture. And, there was a joke going around the NBA that, whenever a former San Antonio coach or manager got an assistant coach of Popovich got a head coaching job, or just got, all the head coaching interviews, for all vacancies, or, director of scouting suddenly got an offer to be the general manager of another team. We'd always joke, when I was looking for a job, or a guy that was looking for, we'd always joke, said, I consulted for San Antonio for 1 year when I started with my scouting service. So, I need to make people realize that, hey, I'm a San Antonio guy too, because it was almost, I know a lot, today there's a lot of talk, about, well, unfortunately, racial aspects, African American coaches supposedly being overlooked. I don't want to go into that aspect in any way, but there was a time when a lot of people, more jokingly than not, but some were like, there did seem to be a bias pro former San Antonio employees. So if you went to do a coaching interview, you were automatically on the front runner because you came from San Antonio. If you were the director of player personnel and you were interviewing for a general manager job with another team, more often than not, you would be the default front runner simply because you're from San Antonio. And, more often than not, these former San Antonio guys would get the job deservedly. Don't get me wrong, but, there was definitely, a San Antonio culture factor. It was not a coincidence.
I mean, off the top of my head, I can think you've got Mike Budenholzer in Milwaukee, Sean Marks over in Brooklyn. You've got obviously Aduko over in Philadelphia, the guy at Orlando. So you're 100% spot on. I just remember reading article after article going, Greg Popovich is looking for a new, and it'd be like year on year, you'd lose 2 or 3. But listen, we're fastly approaching the time we set for this. I'm going to ask you one last question, which might be quite challenging, but who is the, I'm trying to word this the right way. Who is the most thorough scout that you've worked alongside, and why?
Oh gosh, no, that is a tough question because, I respect the work of, most of my colleagues, if not all of them. I'd like to think though that Now, I know this is not the point of a question. I don't want to come off as being, immodest, though. I like to think that if you ask that question to another scout, that my name would pop up as being, I'm taking you literally, and not necessarily saying to being the most thorough with the best. I certainly consider myself to be very thorough, very detail oriented. That doesn't necessarily be the best, but it certainly doesn't hurt to be very, very thorough and very, focused on information. But like I said, I've been fortunate to work with some great guys. So I'm probably also biased. I have to say that all the people I work for, have a particular respect for the guys I work with in Portland, who have gone on to bigger and better things. Guy would be Chad Buchanan, who started off as a college scout when I was working as an international scout in Portland. And today he's the general manager of the Indiana Pacers. And he was actually the interim general manager of the Portland Trailblazers while I was there for a while. But he's one guy who just he had it all. He knew basketball. He was a very hard worker, and just understood the core values of how important it was to be a good person, is just as much as it was important to be a good player and all. So that's one guy I worked with. I think was exceptional. And two more would be Chet Kammerer. Chet Kammerer from the Miami Heat, who taught me so much when I first started. Miami was one of the first clients I had, and I did then also consult for them individually also. But when I had my scouting service with my brother, they were one of the first teams that we had signed. So Chet Kammerer, he's currently now he's kind of working behind the scenes. He's the personal advisor of Pat Riley, but he was the director of scouting the Miami Heat for 20 years, basically. When they won winning championships and all, with Dwayne Wade, and then with LeBron when LeBron joined also. So these are two people that I think that are exceptional, both as people and as scouts, because they taught me a lot. Chet more just in general, because when I first started, he was took me under my wing just like a big brother would do. And Chad, who was just brilliant young guy who was had an incredible career, because like I said, he moved on very quickly from being his hard work paid off, as he moved on from being an exceptional scout to becoming an exceptional manager also of an NBA team.
Perfect. Listen, really appreciate your time. A real fascinating insight into the NBA scouting world and what it's like. So really appreciate your time, and hopefully catch up with you again soon.
Absolutely. Definitely enjoyed this. We should do it again.
Thanks for listening to the Sports Initiative podcast with me, Michael Wright. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at the Sports Initiative Podcast, and share this podcast with friends and family. I'll see you next week.